Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Addicted Mind podcast. My name is Duane. I'm your host. Our guest today is Caroline Beidler. She is an author, recovery advocate, and founder of the storytelling platform Bright Stories Shine. Her new book is Downstairs Church, Finding Hope in the Grit of Addiction and Trauma Recovery. With almost 20 years in leadership within social work and ministry, she is a team writer for the Grit and Grace Project and blogger at the global recovery platform In the Rooms. She is the founder and visionary of the annual International Women's Day Global Recovery event presented by the She Recovers Foundation. Today, we're going to talk about her new book, Downstairs Church, and we're going to talk about hope and grit and how having the courage to share your story is what's so important for others in recovery, but also to our own healing. I loved Caroline's openness, vulnerability, and her willingness to just share her story so she can help others as others have helped her. So I hope you get a lot out of this episode. And if you're getting a lot out of the Addicted Mind podcast, please share it with a friend or write a review wherever you get your podcast. I really do appreciate it. It really does help people find the podcast. So thank you to everyone who has done that. It just means a lot to me. And check us out on Instagram at Addicted Mind Podcast. There you can get all the latest episodes and any resources that we share. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind. My guest today is Caroline Beidler, and we're going to talk about her new book, Downstairs Church, Finding Hope in the Grit of Addiction and Trauma Recovery. Caroline, introduce yourself, tell us about you, and we're going to talk all about your book and some of your other projects, especially around women sharing their story of recovery and hope and all of that. So, Caroline, jump in.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I am just such a fan of the show and so grateful and honored to be sharing with you today. So as you said, my name is Caroline Beidler, and I am a woman in recovery, and I'm so grateful to say that today. You know, today my life looks 100 times, just like infinity times different than it did a couple decades ago when I was in active addiction, when I was living with undiagnosed mental health challenges, when I was struggling through what I didn't know at the time were undiagnosed. It was undiagnosed trauma and PTSD and all of that mess and that muck. Today, I am sitting in my home office and I'm looking out at the foothills. I live in Eastern Tennessee. We live kind of in a little tucked away neighborhood, and out beside my window, there's this foothill, and it's beautiful and it's green, and I have, deer walk by, and there's peace in my life and beauty in my life. And I have two beautiful children, Henry and Violet. They're 4-year-old twins. So I was blessed with, twins in recovery. I know, it was just truly a miracle, and a wonderful husband who I joke is a scientist. So I'm like the creative social worker person, and he is on the other end of the spectrum.
He's on the other side of it. That's a good match, though. That's good.
A good match.
Works well together.
Yes. It's maddening at times, but most days, it works well.
So I'm just, like you said, just going in, and we'll get to your book, but just that first statement of just the chaos of being in the addiction and then being able to be on this other side of it. And like you just said, look out your window and go, wow, I would imagine you could have never believed at that moment when you were in that chaos that this could be the other side.
Never. Not for a second. Not for a second. I didn't know there was another side.
Yeah.
And if there was, it wasn't for me. It was someone else's life and someone else's opportunity. But today I can know and trust, that I am loved and that I'm worthy of being loved, by a family, and being a woman in recovery today. It's been quite the journey, and one that I talk about in my new book.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. Before we were recording, I was talking about just the title of the book, and I want to understand that statement of Downstairs Church and what that means and why that title is so important. And then we'll get into the meat of your book.
Sure. Yeah. So it's funny. I had a family member actually say, you shouldn't have used the word church in the title. because so many people are going to be put off by that. And I get that. I totally get that. And you know what? At one point in my life, I definitely would have been as well.
Right, right.
I heard the phrase and I so connected with it. I had the opportunity to do an interview with one of my favorite authors, Philip Yancey, who is a journalist. He writes a lot about faith and doubt and all of those hard topics that don't generally get talked about in the faith space. And
Right.
in my interview with Philip, he talks about this in one of his books, but his experience going to an AA meeting with a friend and walking downstairs in this church building. It was in Chicago. And I'm going to read this quote because it's on the back of my book now. He says, "From the downstairs church, I learned radical honesty and radical dependence. We can't make it on our own." And he went on to talk with me about how what he thought he was going to find or what he was seeking for a lot of his life in the upstairs spaces of churches and, that spirituality and faith, that there was something different in the downstairs space in that recovery meeting. And it was the honesty and the grit and the authenticity. And that has been my own experience. I mean, I talk a lot about my faith journey in this book too, but I didn't connect in recovery or, really find wellness or what that looked like for me until I connected with a recovery community and until I experienced some of those things that happen in the downstairs spaces. And so one of my ultimate goals for this book is that it shines a light on what happens there. That not only do I walk through some extremely challenging experiences that many women in recovery or seeking recovery go through, and I highlight a couple other women throughout the book as well. I highlight that grit, but then also what happens in the recovery community that can move us from a place of such struggle to freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the title is great. And the way I picture it is, that, like you said, kind of the upstairs church is there and, kind of people have it all together. And then there's this downstairs church where if you haven't been down there, you don't realize like there's incredible vulnerability, incredible hope. But if you haven't been down there before, it's like really terrifying in a way to take that journey. And I kind of see it like of that. It's like, I don't want to go down there because, they're going to tell me how bad I am and how horrible I am. And that's all going to, that's how I kind of see it. I think it's a great title. I like that analogy.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when he said those words put together like that, it was just like something clicked because I had been working on the book, but I wasn't able to bring everything together until we had that conversation. And it's interesting how through him telling me this story, I was able to make a connection with my own story and put it together and hopefully impact, hopefully in some small way, someone else's story. So I'm glad you say that though, because it's interesting. And it does feel the whole process of writing this has been an act of vulnerability. I mean, it is to put it out there, but isn't that just like the recovery journey too, right? Where we put it out there, we're honest, we get it all, in those downstairs spaces, we bring it up, bring it to the light.
Bring it to the light, talk about it and be vulnerable and realize like we're just not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the human experience. It's if you want to have a relationship with others, the vulnerability is just a part of it.
It is. And, I struggled for decades in trying to stay sober and, doing it on my own and trying all sorts of different things. And it wasn't until I could let down some of those walls and show up vulnerable, healing, it wasn't happening for me. I mean, I think even in early recovery, I was just so insulated from trusting others and being okay showing up as myself. I mean, I was still hiding, and looking back, I didn't realize it at the time, but it wasn't until I showed up and said, okay, I'm going to take a leap of faith here and I'm going to get vulnerable and I'm going to find someone trustworthy to connect with and to disclose to and to tell my stories. And that's for me when the healing really started happening.
Yeah. But you got to make that walk downstairs.
Indeed you do, don't you? Yeah, we do.
And that's always can be, I think when people are starting this journey, that can just feel so daunting. So
Mm.
can you talk a little bit about how you did that, how you took those first steps
Mhm.
down into the downstairs church?
So for me, it was relationship. Again, for years tried to do it on my own. I tried, controlled use and drinking. I tried, well, I'm an alcoholic, so I'll smoke pot. Well, that worked till it didn't, right? And then, relationships and sex and all of it. I tried whatever I could to be okay. And of course, nothing worked. But it was relationship. And there was a woman, she's an older woman, and it was actually a church I was going to at the time, trying to go to, still I wasn't really connecting. But she said, have you thought about trying an AA meeting? And I remember thinking, no,
Right.
that's not for me. I mean, of course I knew I was an alcoholic and addict, but she really encouraged me. And I don't know what, now it definitely feels like a supernatural intervention, but I followed her suggestion. And when I walked through the door of that first meeting, I met Kim, who would become one of the first women I really connected with. Kim gave me a big hug and it freaked me out. But instantly I felt like I belonged. It was like, as soon as I crossed that threshold and like just took that step and took that action of just walking through the door, driving in, parking in the parking spot, like getting out, walking through the door. As soon as I got through that door, it was like I could finally take a deep breath. And yes, it was still scary. And yes, it took me a long time before I could say my name in a meeting. But Kim giving me a hug and feeling that instant, okay, this is going to be, I'm going to be okay. There's someone like me here. It made it less scary. And so from this woman's guidance and a relationship I had, and she made the suggestion to other relationships that I would form, like with Kim, that's how it happened. I couldn't do it by myself. I needed to be okay, letting other people know that I needed help and being open to that.
Yeah, to make yourself so vulnerable, and then that's how we learn that we're not alone in this. And part of in the subtitle of your book, Finding Hope in the Grit of Addiction and Trauma Recovery, that's where that trauma comes in. It keeps us from connecting to others, so we kind of always stay upstairs, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something, I struggled with. Do I focus primarily on the addiction recovery? Do I bring trauma? And it was like, of course I bring trauma into the conversation. This is how it all started to begin with. And so I talked through some, especially early on, really challenging experiences that, again, so many women, all folks, men, all folks experience. For me, it was multiple instances of sexual violence. And I talk about it in a way that hopefully isn't triggering, but at the same time sheds a light on what happened. And that, and I've had people tell me in, feedback, like, because you shared that, I feel like I can share that now too.
Right.
We saw it with the Me Too movement. It's like, as soon as someone else tells their story, we're human beings. We feel all of a sudden this, almost like this, okay, it's okay if I do this too, or I can join in, I belong with the group that has experienced this. And I want all folks to know that it's okay to talk about these things, because for me, I was sober for several years before I really dug into my trauma, and I was still having unhealthy relationships. I was still active eating disorder. I was still dealing with the stuff. So it wasn't until I took a look at the trauma piece that my recovery really became what it is today.
I'm glad you say that, because, I think a lot of times when we're in our pain and we're kind of locked in this, we don't realize that this is a journey. Like this is something, it takes a step at a time, and that it's not just this overnight shift and we just change and we're all good and all right, let's move forward. That it's a journey.
Yeah, it definitely is. And, I think hearing stories of other women, specifically for me, hearing stories from other women about their journey, that it isn't for most of us just kind of like a decision. And then all of a sudden we're healed and there's this, great white light that shines down from heaven. And all of a sudden we're, the obsession is lifted. For some people, maybe, and that's wonderful. But my experience was slow and steady over time. But the more that I opened my eyes and listened to other women's stories of their own experience of healing, their own experience of yeah, you might set the substances down, but then you have an anxiety disorder that just, you have
Right.
to deal, as the more that I heard about other women having these layered experiences in recovery, the more I just felt okay. It was like, you know what? I'm not crazy. There's not a ton wrong with me. Like, I'm okay. And I went through these things and this happened, but there is hope. And I think that's ultimately where I'm hoping that this book lands also, is that there is hope in the grit of what we've experienced.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that hope in the grit, because that kind of goes to what we're saying. Because when you start this journey, you're in the grit, you're in it. And how do you hold out hope in all of that?
Hmm. For me, it definitely has been a spiritual experience, because honestly, on my own, I like to say that I could hold on to hope and have
Right.
perseverance, but I can't. I mean, I think it's a supernatural spiritual thing when we're able to have resilience in the face of horrific traumas and struggle. I believe it is a spiritual thing when we have resilience as a human being. And it doesn't matter what we go through. I mean, it could be addiction. It could be, name your thing. As humans, we all go through our things, but to be
Right.
able to continue walking and journeying and have that resilience despite the grittiness of what we've experienced, I mean, that is a beautiful, and I would say miraculous thing. So yeah, for me, it has definitely been a spiritual experience.
Yeah, and in the 12 step, there's the idea of the higher power and relying on something bigger than yourself to put your hope in. And yeah, I do agree that recovery is like, it's a spiritual piece that we also have to have, that's bigger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think, for so many of us who have had similar experiences with trauma, I think for me that personal relationship with the higher power, that took time, and that took trust, and that took a lot of me showing up more vulnerably. I mean, I remember, I tell this story quite a bit, but it's like, I remember the moment where I got real angry with God, like so angry. I was literally like foaming. You felt like, like yelling and just getting it all out. I was so angry. And I just remember dropping to the ground after just having this tirade, and instant peace. It was like, I just felt God being like, thank you, like it was just something that it was almost like a barrier fell down between God and me and this relationship, because I was being honest with God. I wasn't
Right.
hiding. I wasn't lying. I wasn't going to church pretending everything was fine. I was saying, you know what? I'm angry that this happened. How could you let this happen? And from there, gratefully, I was introduced to people and to writers. I mentioned Philip Yancey. He wrote a great book called Where is God When It Hurts? And that book changed my life. I reference it in my book. But I was introduced to these people and these ideas and these stories of other folks who had been through horrific things, but they were still able to get to a place of truly understanding that God was still there, is still there, wasn't the author of that bad thing because we live in a broken world, but is there with us and connects with that and has compassion for us and feels with us. And so my relationship with God has been something that it continually evolves. But anyways,
Yeah.
when I was honest with God, something changed.
It's like you showed up as your full self there in this spiritual relationship with God, and you're just like, here I am. This is
Mhm.
me. And let's hash this out, so to speak.
Right. Right. Let's talk about this.
Let's talk about it.
Do
But
this.
then that's the freedom, right? Like
Yeah.
the ability to be so vulnerable, even with our spiritual selves.
Mhm.
I think is part of that. What about, when you're talking about hope and the grit, how these adversities give rise to our healing, and how does, when you see all these things that you had to go through and these challenges along the way, how did that actually help you?
Hmm. Oh, that's a tough. These are some tough questions here.
Sorry.
No, I'm loving it. See,
I
this is
just like to,
like,
I try to really kind of get to that piece where we see that change.
Yeah, no, I love it. Just get to the heart. And this is recovery. This is being vulnerable and open and honest. I wish I had like a soundbite answer for you, because I love that. First of all, as a writer, I like it when it's concise and it's, you know what I mean? Like to the point.
But these are hard. These are complicated. I mean, when we talk about our spiritual life and our healing and our emotions, I mean, they're complicated. It's sometimes hard to put these events, these experiences into words. So I totally understand that too.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And, I try to write quite a bit about this in my book also. For my own story and my own experience, what I can say is that I would not go back and change a thing, even though I went through some really hard stuff that I know I'm not alone in that. I'm certainly not unique. My story is not unique. I wouldn't go back and change anything, because when those things happen, I don't know if it's like in scripture, actually, it talks about a refining fire where those things about your humanity and your person are burned away, and, kind of that selfhood, not in the good sense, but is kind of stripped away, to where we're at a point where, and I've heard people talk in meetings about this gift of desperation, that given this gift of having nothing left, totally at my wit's end, at the end of my rope, and then what's left? There's like, you have two choices. You could either just, okay, this is it, there is nothing left, or reach my hand out for something outside of myself. And I had the opportunity to do that. And so many people don't,
Yeah.
there's someone I work with, a woman, and she just lost a recovery house roommate, just left recovery housing. Her dad came in 2 hours later to get her stuff and said she had just died. And it happens every day, all day long. People are losing their life and not having the opportunity to make that reach, and it's like, oh, it's just such a waste. And I think back on my experience and I feel so grateful. And at the same time, not just grateful that I'm here and have this life and have this window I can look out, but there's a weight to that, to be still being here, that I think those of us in recovery and what you're doing, I mean, there's a responsibility that we have to then give back and to be on the other end of that, reaching out, where we're there to help support those people struggling, where we're there, where we can give a hug to the woman coming into a first meeting, and we can open that church door, whether it's to the upstairs or to the downstairs. There's a responsibility when we have moved from those hard things and come out on the other side.
Well, I love what you said too about like the what was the quote about being refined through the adversity, through the fire. It's like it just kind of burns away all the BS. And
yeah, I like that. That's simple. That is a soundbite.
Right. And we get to the just being real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being real. And that's what I love about recovery. I mean, that's what I love about the downstairs church. And, more than just my book, more than just telling my story or shining a light on recovery, I really hope that it also acts as an advocacy tool and brings community awareness to this, that people without addiction issues pick this up. Or if you have a family member that's struggling, to learn more about what happens in recovery, because it's beautiful. And I think that I believe personally that everyone's in recovery from something, or should be.
Right.
But, wherever you're at, I believe that we can all learn from that recovery's place, from that downstairs church, and from what happens there, that gritty, that honest, that vulnerable place.
Yeah. So you really shared your story vulnerable. Like you said, I mean, it's vulnerable to put yourself out there in a public way, but it's such a gift to others. And I think that's what's so important about your book and putting it out there. But you also do a lot of other things I want to talk about too, because I think they highlight the power of your book, but they also highlight the power of story. And that's your blog, where your book is as well. It's like Bright Stories Shine. And I would like to talk to you about that as well, because I was looking at that and I was just really touched by it. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I started Bright Stories Shine during, 2020. I don't know where you all were, but my world was falling apart, and I was
Right.
had a lot of stuff coming up with my mental health. I started needing to see other women's stories. I knew I needed it. I needed to connect with women. I needed to see and hear what other women were experiencing, and I needed to hear recovery stories. And I felt like there wasn't a lot of that out there. I mean, I just felt like, I needed more and I needed deeper connection. And so I just decided, and I've always loved writing, that I would, put some of my thoughts down, but how amazing would it be to open it up, to be able to provide a space where other women can share and other women can shine their light of recovery and inspire others. And it's been beautiful. And I've met so many amazing women just opening up that submission process, which has been so incredible. Women I still connect with, who I've learned their stories and they've had the opportunity to share on the platform. And I'm hoping to do more of that over the next year and really expand on, having submissions and publications, because I just believe so strongly that when we have that opportunity to share, and some of us feel moved to share publicly like that even more healing can happen, and it gives hope to others.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because it really just, as we share these stories, like you had the courage to share your story in this book and to write about this. My thought is it's going to touch someone else who is going to read your story and relate to it and just not feel alone. It'll be like the hug you got when you walked into that meeting.
Oh, that's I'm going to cry. That's a beautiful picture. That's a beautiful image. I love that.
Because you took the chance to be vulnerable and share it. I think that's just amazing. I love that.
Thank you. I'm going to hang on to that image. Thank you so much. And I've told my husband that, if the book helps one person, and I'm not going to lie, writing a book is a lot of work. And then also promoting the book and, doing all the things authors do.
All the stuff that you're doing right now. But you got to get the word out, right? Because people have to find it and have to get it, because there's someone out there who needs to read this book.
Right. I mean, it's a lot of work, but if one woman or person is impacted by it, it makes it 100% worth it. Because decades ago, how my life could have maybe prevented a lot of the struggle, and I wouldn't have had to gone through some stuff had I connected with a book or with another woman's story earlier on. Who knows? But hopefully this can do that for someone else.
I think it will. So, wow, Caroline, I just thank you for having the courage to do this, to write this book, to come on the podcast and promote it and put it out there for people to find so they can get a hold of it. Just thanks a lot. But before we go, I always like to ask one question as we're getting kind of to our time here. Mm-hmm. And that's, if maybe there's a woman out there who is struggling, like where you were, right? Like in the grit, in the hopelessness before they could find hope. What would you want to tell them? What would you want to say to them? You can say one thing.
I think I would say that you do not have to stay in that place. You do not have to stay in that place, that there is hope on the other side of what you're experiencing. You do not have to stay in that place. And there are people who want to come alongside you and walk alongside you and help you climb out of that. So I want to give that woman, that person, hope today, that there is another way and that recovery is possible and life change is possible.
Oh, that's awesome, Caroline. Thank you so much. Where can they find you? Where can they find the book?
Well, my website, CarolineBeidler.com. Google me. I'm on the socials, Facebook and Instagram. I would love to connect with you there. So yeah, I hope to connect.
And as usual, I'll put all the links in the show notes at theaddictedmind.com so you can check it out. Check out the book. I encourage everybody to read it and get it. Caroline, thank you so much for coming on to the Addicted Mind podcast and just being vulnerable.
Oh, thank you. I really love being here, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It is so, so important.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Addicted Mind podcast. As usual, all the show notes will be at theaddictedmind.com. So check that out. There, you can get a link to Caroline's book, Downstairs Church, Finding Hope in the Grit of Addiction and Trauma Recovery. And if you got a lot out of this episode, don't forget, click the subscribe button in your podcast app or share the podcast with a friend. All right. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you on the next episode.